Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. You know the rest, and if you don't, the lyrics are gonna be on screen. You should know this. Every single Spider-Man fan should learn this. And if you don't have this ingrained in your brain the same way every Green Lantern fan knows the oath, come on, you're slacking. But either way, Spider-Man, as everyone knows, is the most popular Marvel character of all time and in very high contention of being the most famous and most beloved superhero of all time. This month alone, Spider-Man Brand New Day is about to drop, and people are saying that it is going to get over $500 million just like that, either in the weekend it comes out or the part of the month that is remaining. Either way, that is insane. Spider-Man has been a cultural phenomenon forever, but that really started to take off in the 2000s with the release of Ultimate Spider-Man and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. That is when most people had their eye on the character, if not then, in the 90s with the Spider-Man animated series. But while all the fans are looking directly at those adaptations of the Wallcrawler, DC was doing something very similar, but also in a way that I thought was very brilliant. Something that I've noticed is that a lot of people like to point out that there is a lack of Spider-Man ripoffs or blatant copycats. With Superman or even Batman, there are a lot of recognizable pastiches of these characters, which really solidified their place in pop culture as some of the biggest heroes of all time. But if Spider-Man is seen on such a high pedestal and belongs in that top tier of superheroes, where are his? While there are many direct copycats like an Agent Spider or a Black Spider from Young Justice, what I've noticed is that ever since the 70s and 80s, DC has been on a roll, really taking the Peter Parker archetype and just reconfiguring it into so many different variations that it gets to the point where you don't even realize that the character is based off of him. But if you do, it's not to the point of feeling like they're a copycat. They're so original and unique to themselves with their own mythos, supporting cast, powers, identity, and just enough good comics on their own to really stand out separated from Peter himself, which is actually a huge feat considering how popular he really is. When it comes to Batman and Superman, when you got characters like Black Noir or Homelander, everyone is going to mention that they're just Superman or Batman in a different shade of paint. With these characters, DC really broke the code and created a method of long-term success that is still going on to this day, in a way that Marvel has never really replicated. But the interesting part is that DC didn't even think of creating this pipeline in the first place. It all really started off with the GOAT, the late great Gerry Conway, who was, in effect, one of Marvel's greatest writers. And when it came to Spider-Man, he might as well have been the definitive Spider-Man writer along with JMD Mateus. But I would give Gerry Conway the edge considering his first Amazing Spider-Man run came off the heels of Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita Sr. and their entire tenure on the character. He had big shoes to fill at only 19 years of age, and he passed the test with flying colors. Don't let anybody say otherwise, creating generational stories like the death of Gwen Stacy, introducing characters like the Jackal, Hammerhead, Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin, and of course creating the Punisher, as if his entire resume wasn't stacked enough. And that's not even mentioning, by the time of the 80s, where we would see him on books like Spectacular Spider-Man and Web of Spider-Man, he would be giving us more great Spider-Man content along with a very underrated Tombstone Saga, which will probably make its way at least as some sort of inspirational piece in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Eventually though, Conway would jump ship onto DC Comics, creating books like Man-Bat and of course writing the Justice League team during the very influential Satellite era. However, what I deem to be his most grand inclusion to the DC universe was the creation of Firestorm. What Conway realized is that DC had a little bit of a gap. There wasn't that relatable teenage hero, and that is where Firestorm came in. First with the 70s run, and then with the 80s run, which ran to 100 issues all the way up till 1990. Some of your favorite characters like Moon Knight or Aquaman can't even reach that. I don't even know if Black Panther has done that. That shows you how popular Firestorm was back in the day, and currently with Jeff Lemire's run, the character is getting into a really interesting direction that shakes things up, making him a bit darker, more apocalyptic, and grander, while still keeping a lot of the DNA that Conway injected into him. But going back to the original creation of Ronnie Raymond, Conway had this idea. After leaving Spider-Man, what if he created something that took the same archetype, but flipped it? Instead of making him the brightest man in the room, what if he wasn't exactly the smartest person? What if he was a little bit dumb? He's just a guy drifting his way through college, but he becomes a superpowered, overpowered character, a hero who can literally manipulate molecules and create whatever he wants. The next step is, how do you make this work? Well, we'll have him share the powers. We'll make him a 2-in-1 special with Professor Stein, his professor who is extremely intelligent, so now we know how he's going to manipulate those molecules, and then make them fuse together. And it really just made sense. His logic for creating Firestorm, that name, was that if we're bringing two characters together, what does that mean? It's a fusion. Fusion leads to nuclear. The nuclear man is his nickname, and of course he can manipulate atoms. That leads to Firestorm, a term for what would happen in a nuclear blast, while also literally having fire on his head. All of these elements start to fit together like Legos. It's natural, taking multiple ideas and fusing them together just like his conception. The configuration create the character that we know today, and as you might expect, being a kid, he's very similar to Spider-Man. He's sassy, witty, and he has that young, somewhat adolescent way of approaching situations that make him very relatable to the audience. The only real difference is that he has a parental figure on his shoulders at all times, speaking in his ear like a little oracle to make sure he gets things done right. That little voice in his head, though, can actually take over his body and work as well. Usually it's Ronnie, though, in the front seat and Stein as the co-pilot. But that's what makes it interesting. This creates a situation where you have the adult constantly looking over your shoulder, giving you advice and telling you what to do. Will you listen to that advice or will you do your own thing? That's the question every single young adult asked when their parents were still trying to guide them. A really cool concept to make your hero, but as you might expect with any young adult college-based hero, he has a double life, a secret identity that he has to balance along with the supporting cast that Conway used similarly to Spider-Man as a way to create ongoing subplots and stories he could return to later, because if you're writing monthly comics, there are so many deadlines and future issues you have to plan while still telling the story you want to tell. Not exactly the easiest job, but once you're working within that college life and soap opera style drama that made people attach to Spider-Man in the first place, you get something familiar but completely different. Now, your protagonist can create solar flares, manipulate atoms, turn objects into completely different things, and create some weird concoction like putting somebody into a basketball cage, throwing them into a giant basketball net, and that net turns into another cage. Like, it gets to that level of insanity. It's like a Green Lantern situation, but instead of creating constructs, he's manipulating matter itself, and because of that, the possibilities are endless. The really cool thing, though, that I love about Firestorm is that unlike other characters who are basically around legacy or are trying to be pushed towards legacy, Firestorm naturally works with it. The Firestorm Matrix is all about fusion, the fusion of two personalities, and sometimes even three. That leads to so many different scenarios where you can bring in new characters and completely change the dynamic. You can have the Professor as the main voice, Ronnie as the pilot, an evil character becoming a part of his psyche, Professor Stein taking complete control and becoming a literal fire elemental, okay, or even introducing Jason Rush, a new Firestorm. It creates a character who can constantly evolve and be reinvigorated every decade without losing what makes him special. Not to mention, he has a pretty solid rogues gallery too, despite being more of a B to C list character. Killer Frost is one of them, a character that a lot of people love from the Flash TV show, but in the comics, she is just as, if not better. Every fire-based hero needs an ice-based villain. Then you have Multiplex, who is literally the perfect villain for a fusion-based character, someone who can literally split himself into thousands or millions of versions. Quite literally, nuclear fission fighting against nuclear fusion. And of course, other characters like the Thinker, Typhoon, who is an extremely overpowered water-based character, Hyena, who, I'm gonna be honest, I mostly knew because of his future adaptation in Batman Beyond, and of course, Deathstorm, Firestorm, but with a skull and basically Ghost Rider. His Earth 3 version is really cool, the Crime Syndicate one, along with my favorite, the Black Lantern version, who is just, the sauce is just, it breaks the limiter. If it's at 10, it's at 11, it gets to that point. All in all though, for first attempt, I couldn't have thought of a better starter. But if the Flamehead was meant to be a character created to mimic that Spider-Man archetype and storytelling structure, what about a character who was folded, melded, and reconstructed to fit within that same structure? Now, for the record, Wally West was a character created way before Spider-Man's time as a sidekick of Barry Allen as Kid Flash. Over the years, though, you would see him inducted into the Teen Titans, fighting alongside friends and family and doing the right thing as a teenager, eventually progressing into adulthood. At this time, though, I don't really think there was anything Spider-Man-like about his character. He was very Flash-coded, Barry Allen was his mentor, and a lot of his teachings and worldview were very connected to the second Flash. There wasn't that much Peter Parker influence or that archetype being used at that point, but he does get revamped during Crisis on Infinite Earths when Barry Allen sacrifices his life. And then there's a new spot open, there is a vacancy, Wally, and now he has to step up and become the third Flash. This is where I really started to see the similarities. While Wally was still early in his career here, he was about 19 to 20 years old, maybe 21, which is very similar to college-aged Peter, and let's be honest, that is basically the main starting point of Spider-Man. Peter Parker in 616 spent most of his time as Spider-Man in college anyway. His high school career only lasted about 28 issues before he graduated, and by around the 30th issue or 31, he was already a college student and an adult because the original Spider-Man, if you don't know, actually somewhat moved in real time. Here, Wally is pretty much the same age as Peter, so it makes sense that the similarities are starting to appear. One thing I really want to point out is that at the beginning of both of their journeys, they were, to put it a bit lightly, a-holes. They weren't exactly the most likable people, but over time, we see them mature and become better characters and better people because of their love interests. We see them build relationships that actually have the potential to stand the test of time, which is impressive considering these are comic books at the end of the day, and status quo shifts are very much necessary. Both of them, though, are very supporting character and cast heavy, and at their peak, they might have had some of the best supporting casts in all of comics. And like I said before with Firestorm, both of them are jokey, witty, sarcastic, anything you want to say, very relatable. They both have this feeling of not being good enough, not being strong enough, and trying to live up to the standards of people they think they could never reach. But eventually, they overcome that and become the best versions of themselves. And to really give you a better parallel between these two characters, I want to bring up my very trusty chart created by a very special Reddit user that I'm blanking on, but thank you so much. Here you go. So as you can see here, this really shows you the progression of both characters, where they started, where they ended up, and where they are now. Some of you guys might have seen this before, but if you have, just bear with me because Wally West essentially becomes a perfected version of Spider-Man, just entrenched into the Flash mythos. So, for both of them, they start off as young heroes, Wally West as Kid Flash, Spider-Man as, of course, a young hero trying to figure things out. They both grow up after losing their mentor and uncle, and then both of them lose their child. With Wally, it was because of Zoom being absolutely insane and disrespectful. I've never seen somebody snap their fingers, create a shockwave, and lead to somebody getting a miscarriage. That's not even funny. Linda got a miscarriage because of this. The amount of disrespect is honestly absurd. And with Spider-Man, it was Green Goblin and everything that came with that. They don't even know that it was Green Goblin to begin with. The baby just dies before it can be born, and that right there might have been the beginning of the end. And then we see here, a devil steals their love. Wally did the One More Day storyline better, cleaner, and overall in a more enjoyable way than Peter did 10 years before that ever happened. My boy was pioneering stuff before Spidey even did it. Not to mention, he literally created the Speed Force in Flash Comics along with the Flash family. And this is where I want to go on a little bit of a tangent, because Wally West is one of the only characters I can comfortably say is a match for Peter Parker. He is one of the only characters who used Peter as a blueprint and became just as good, if not better than Peter from an objective standpoint, at least in the comics. He cultivated a supporting cast that I absolutely love. If we look at William Messner-Loeb's run, he crafted a lot of great civilian supporting cast members, but if you look at Mark Waid's run forward, we have Impulse Bart Allen, Jay Garrick, Max Mercury, Linda Park, and many, many more. Linda is one of the best love interests there is from Messner-Loeb's run. The Speed Force and the powers he cultivated and created, and eventually becoming faster than other speedsters, even Barry Allen, is extremely impressive. Everyone was learning from Wally. And then you have his Rogues Gallery, characters that originally came up from the Barry Allen era of comics, but they became even better with writers like Mark Waid and Jeff Johns, who helped turn the Rogues into A-list villains. They got their own stories, their own perspectives, and even issues where we follow them directly through Rogue files and see their origins or just what they're doing as the main protagonist. He even helped create new villains that stood the test of time, like Black Flash, Zoom, Savitar, Cicada, Magenta, Tarpit, Cobalt Blue, and many, many more. But despite all the success, we gotta go back to the drawing board because his marriage, just like Peter, got erased. We know how all of that plays out for Spider-Man, but for Wally, it happened after Barry Allen. Again, Barry Allen. He messed up the time stream, leading into the Flashpoint event that rebooted everything into the New 52. From here, both of their lives start falling apart and they lose everything. Of course, with Peter, we have Zeb Wells' run, even Dan Slott's run to a degree, and with Wally, we have Heroes in Crisis, which we will never mention again. We will zip our mouth from here on out mentioning that name. Anyways, the difference here is that the final column for Peter is still missing. For Wally, he eventually gets everything back. His children, his family, and he even has a third child. He is currently the main Flash and has maintained that position again for almost half a decade, maybe even half a decade at this point, and it doesn't seem like DC plans on changing that anytime soon. He has maintained his position as not only the Flash, but in my opinion, as the second attempt at creating this archetype, the perfected way to create a Spider-Man. So far, we've been talking about Spider-Man adult structured characters because Peter spent most of his time as an adult in comics. But in adaptations, it is a bit of a different story. So what about if DC decided to do another archetype switch with the same character? What if they decided to spend more time on the teenage years? At the time, in the 90s, that was pretty unheard of because there were many adaptations really detailing a hero's high school life in an explicit order. But DC, they had a plan in their hands to do that with their next Robin. Enter Tim Drake, a character who is very much a normal kid. He goes to school, his parents, unlike Peter's, are a little bit wealthy, but not ridiculously wealthy. He's comfortable enough to go to a private school though when needed, but at the beginning of his own solo book, he was like everybody else. He was dealing with problems that kids nowadays experience all the time. Bullying leading to gun violence, street gang activity leading to the death of classmates, drug use, and a lot of real-world issues that were tackled throughout the Robin series. But it was done in a way that felt very real to readers, picking up those single issues every month. The biggest difference, though, is that while Peter had to live with Aunt May, Tim had both of his parents. In fact, he didn't really have a tragic backstory. He had everything, and that is what makes his decision to become a hero one of the most selfless things I've ever seen in a comic book. Because he was comfortable, he had everything he wanted, but he realized Gotham City itself would fall apart if Batman didn't have a Robin after the death of Jason Todd. Jason's death sent Batman into a darker, more unforgiving, and more reckless place. Batman needed an anchor. Batman always needs a Robin. And if Dick Grayson wasn't going to take that spot back, Tim would have to do it himself. He would have to prove to Batman and even himself that he could be a worthy successor. The problem was, unlike Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, Tim didn't have a natural athletic ability, fighting experience, or any special skills that immediately made him a great candidate. All he really had was his mind. And being incredibly well versed with technology and the internet, which made sense considering he was growing up in an era where the internet was becoming more and more important. He was probably taking classes on how to use the internet, so he was probably, you know what I mean? He was better than everybody else. But because Batman didn't want Tim to end up like Jason, he made him go through more extensive training. Unlike the previous Robins, Tim had to travel the world, training and learning before he could even put on the Robin suit and eventually get his own title, because if we look at Jason, he did not have the same grit, the same strength and street smarts and ingenuity that he had. Dick Grayson had a natural athletic ability to do quadruple backflips and had the strength, speed, and skills necessary to be on a better footing than Tim ever was. But one thing you could always say about Tim Drake is that just like Peter, he had that Parker lock. And he had it in abundance. It was not going out of style because horrible things happened to him again and again, to the point where he became so broken that there were times where you would genuinely wonder what he would do next. Would he actively put himself in danger, or would his selflessness become the thing that destroys him? His willingness to help others constantly came at the expense of himself, and you could even see some similarities with his relationships. He had his own version of the Spider-Man, Mary Jane, and Black Cat dynamic. On one side, he was Tim Drake with his girlfriend Ariana, but as Robin, that dirty little dog, he was getting involved with Stephanie Brown, the spoiler, who didn't even know he already had a partner, so it got extremely messy. Tim Drake, probably the greatest cheater of all time at the big age of 15. But soon, the tragedies would only get worse. He lost his mother very early on in his career, actually even before he became Robin and he was training. His father, his best friend Superboy, his girlfriend, another best friend in Bart Allen, and eventually even his father figure, Bruce Wayne, after being adopted. That was a constant storm of pain and loss that he brought upon himself because he wanted to be a hero. But it never stopped him from being one. Yes, there would be moments where he would quit, but he would always come back. But in this case, it pushed him to become something darker. He eventually took on the identity of Red Robin, fighting criminals and organizations that were too dangerous for a normal boy wonder to handle. He had to level up, and so he did, leading to situations where he nearly died against the Council of Spiders, almost died fighting Red Hood, got a batarang stuck into his chest, and even almost broke his no-kill rule when he confronted Captain Boomerang, the man who killed his father. But at the end of the day, he understood the responsibility behind his actions, because just like Batman, Tim's greatest weapon is his mind. He is arguably the most Batman-like out of all the Robins. He plans ahead, he thinks 10 steps ahead of everyone else, and understands the consequences of his actions before he makes a decision. Of course, there are certain moments where it gets a bit foggy, but for the real structured answers, when it comes to very, very life-changing decisions, he'll be on the ball. So just like Peter, responsibility is a core part of his character. It's the thing that shaped him into the hero he is today. Shifting our perspective from the ground to a more intergalactic setting, we're going to be moving on to the Green Lantern, and this is really interesting because it brought Green Lantern all the way back down to the ground, and in New York City no less. The home, the birthplace and one of the most iconic locations, if not the most iconic location in Spider-Man history. In fact, Green Lantern sales were declining so badly that the new writer of Green Lantern, Ron Marz, actually pitched a new Green Lantern to take over the book, one who was completely modeled after Spider-Man himself, Kyle Rayner. Now, I know a lot of you guys like him because of the new Death Battle, but recently, he's been taken away from that more street-level chessboard and thrown into the deep reaches of space to become, in effect, Space Jesus with a White Lantern ring. That's what you guys know, but recently, he's been brought back down to Earth, but the less you speak about Jeremy Adams' run, the better. But Kyle Rayner was modeled after Peter Parker to a T. Ron really wanted him to be the everyman character, someone the audience could relate to. He would face money problems just like Peter Parker. He wasn't a photographer, but instead, he was a struggling freelance artist. And that actually became a key part of his Green Lantern abilities and character because being an artist allowed him to be more creative with his constructs. An artist in the modern day, though, also means you're probably a nerd. So what did I just do? So Kyle Rayner I just tried to push up, never mind. Kyle would throw references into the constructs he created, basically making every issue a Where's Waldo scenario as you look for all of these different references within the constructs. But I will say it made every issue more fun because you never knew what cool thing he was going to create next. Although it does make you wonder why he never used the ring to make money, but again, he is a heroic, by-the-book character. He isn't going to do anything somewhat illegal. I mean, I probably would do that if I was in a situation. I brought this up last time. This is going to be a recurring thing. Every single time I bring up a Green Lantern, why don't you make money out of your ring? It is literally green, and you can go... You could print it out like nothing. And what does it do? It doesn't destroy the environment. You could make more money. You could make money for the world to use. And it doesn't have to rely on trees. Big brain. Anyways, both of them, to bring up more similarities, also stem from accidental heroism. Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. You know the drill. Kyle Rayner was thrown into the deep end after being given the last Green Lantern ring by one of the few surviving Guardians of the Universe before they disappeared. And from there, Kyle had to figure everything out himself. Unlike the other Green Lanterns, he didn't have a long history of mentors guiding him through every challenge. He didn't even have somebody like a Kilowog to break him in quickly. He had to do everything himself. He had to deal with every fight ahead of him and hope he would survive. And one of his first major challenges was fighting characters like Mongol, a literal Superman-level threat. Of course, he had Superman there to help him, but having one of your first major battles be against someone at that level, that would overwhelm almost any experienced hero. But the most important moment of Kyle's early career was the death of his girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, the infamous example of the fridging trope. The intention for it was to be Kyle's version of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben moment, because at this point, Kyle was playing around with the ring. He saw it as a toy, like everything was fun and games. He needed that wake-up call. He needed to understand that being a hero was serious and that having godlike power doesn't mean the people you love are automatically safe. Unfortunately, it wasn't handled perfectly. It happened way too quickly, taking place around the 3rd or 4th issue of Kyle's time as Green Lantern, and to be honest, everyone agrees it needed more time to develop. But Ron understood that this was supposed to be a pivotal moment, and they would revisit it multiple times, even with other writers showing alternate futures of what could have happened if the roles were reversed. And the funny thing is, a similar situation happened with Gwen Stacy years earlier, but people weren't exactly looking at stories through the same lens back then as they were in the 90s. The good news is that the Green Lantern run from Mars and eventually Judd Winnick, and later leading into Jeff Johns' relaunch of the Cosmic Green Lantern mythos, became one of DC's strongest eras. The character became a massive success. There were even points where Kyle's Green Lantern was outselling major characters like Superman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, and even competing with Batman and outselling him at times. And that right there shows you how effective it is to model characters after relatable figures like Spider-Man. Out of everyone we talked about though, I think Kyle Rayner resembles Peter the most because that was the complete intention from the beginning. The other characters we mentioned either started with that Peter Parker baseline and branched away, or were never Peter Parker-like to begin with, but slowly transitioned into that role. Kyle was created specifically to be that. No coincidence, no cherry-picking of certain ideas, that is what he was. But what made him special is that despite this, he wasn't a complete copy. His Green Lantern history, his mythology, and the world around him gave him something unique. The Spidey archetype was never used more directly for a new character than it was for Kyle, but the great thing is that it wasn't a cash grab. The writers made sure that this new era of Green Lantern had the quality to match the sales. The character development was strong, the stories continued evolving, and they never kept him stagnant. Even when the original Green Lanterns, like Hal Jordan and John Stewart, eventually returned to the spotlight. But how about another universe? And you might be asking, Nate, what are you talking about? This video is about DC. Well, this next character has an interesting story because he wasn't even originally meant to be for DC. He was actually meant for the Marvel Universe, and the inspiration behind the character was Spider-Man and his marriage. The creator loved Spider-Man, but as a kid, he loved seeing the nerdy guy who loved science. He didn't have everything go his way, and he had to struggle through everyday problems. But by the time he was creating this new character, Spider-Man had changed. Peter Parker was married to Mary Jane Watson, a literal supermodel. He had his own apartment, his life was more stable, and he wasn't really struggling in the same way he was anymore. And while he did accept this, that is not what the creator loved about Spider-Man. That wasn't the part he wanted to capture, so he pitched a character who was essentially Spider-Man, but black and younger. Marvel, though, ultimately passed on the idea and picked up Speedball instead. And if you want to know more about Speedball, check out Alex Lennon's video on the character. He's the GOAT. Everyone who knows about this character knows about him from that video. But this is what led to Dwayne McDuffie going over to DC Comics, and this is what helped him create Static. And really, the rest was history. It became the launch of Milestone Comics, not just another superhero universe. It was a black-led initiative with black characters dealing with black experiences and issues. Of course, many of these problems affect people of different backgrounds depending on where they live, but the stories were specifically created to speak to the black community. And what they realized was that they already had their Superman level character with Icon. They had their Iron Man Batman level character with Hardware, but they needed their Spider-Man. And that led to the creation and redevelopment of Static. What really cemented him as one of the best Spider-Man inspired characters though was the Static Shock TV show that had everybody tuning in on the kids' WB. Even Shaquille O'Neal was watching that show. It became one of the most respected and popular shows of its time, and what made it stand out the most was how willing it was to push the envelope. Just like the comics, Static Shock wasn't afraid to talk about real-world issues. Gun violence, racism, like hardcore racism, sexism, bullying, and how those things can push people towards doing horrible things. It would make you understand why someone became the way they did, while also making you question whether their actions were justified. Just because someone has a reason doesn't mean they're right. You can't fight fire with fire unless you want to start an explosion, or even worse, a chain reaction. The series even tackled police brutality and corruption. The first storyline focused on how people were treated as disposable because of their connection to gangs, leading to a government experiment and project that was supposed to track down criminals, but instead resulted in people being killed or mutilated. Thankfully, Static gained powers from it, but not everyone was so lucky. Gang warfare was also a huge part of the series, especially when it came to Virgil himself. At the beginning, he was almost pulled into that lifestyle. He was given a gun and had the opportunity to become someone he didn't want to be, but he made the choice that this wasn't the life that he wanted. He chose to be better. The series also explored topics that weren't commonly seen in superhero media at the time, including LGBTQ+ issues. In the comics, Richie, Virgil's best friend, is confirmed to be gay. There were a little bit of some hints here and there in the show, but in the comics, they were able to explore it further. And that's something 60s and 70s Spider-Man comics weren't really tackling. Questions about growing up, relationships, identity, and becoming an adult were becoming more important because the world had changed. Things weren't the same as they were decades earlier. In the 90s, creators had the opportunity to tell different kinds of stories and create characters that reflected different communities, but the audience still had to connect with them, because at the end of the day, a character doesn't become a cultural phenomenon just because of who they represent. People have to love the character, and Static proved that. Even when Milestone eventually shut down and was later brought back, the Static Shock TV show allowed that message to reach kids around the world, especially in North America, where many black viewers were able to see a character who looked like them, acted like them, and was treated as a genuine superhero. That was the key to Static. He wasn't just a black Spider-Man, he captured the same idea, the concept that made Peter Parker special, the essence, while bringing his own experiences, his own world, and his own identity to the genre. And I'm disappointed with where Static is right now, but thankfully, it does look like DC is taking steps towards bringing back his popularity, but only time will tell. The next character is a bit of an interesting case because he was created specifically for animation. The jig is up, I'm not even gonna pretend. It is Batman Beyond, yes sir, and I'm honestly surprised it took so long to merge two of the most popular characters of all time, Batman and Spider-Man. The money you would make, Warner Bros, if you even had a few brain cells still running, you would realize the moolah Batman Beyond as a movie or a revival of the show would make. Give it a mature, focused 7 to 12 episodes, maybe even put it on Adult Swim, and everyone would be watching. Batman but Spider-Man does sound funny, but it works extremely well. Terry had the same angst, the goofy, funny aspects to his character, but he also had something different compared to Peter. He had a darker side that Peter never really had. He was a nerd, but Terry was an athlete. He was someone who could have easily been the popular jock, but instead, he kept to himself. He was a bit of a loner, only really connecting with his girlfriend and a small group of friends. But at the beginning of the series, Terry didn't really have much going for him. He came from a rough crowd and ended up in juvenile detention because of some serious mistakes that could have easily landed him in prison if he were older, but because he was underage, he got another chance. And this is why the Batman mantle meant so much to him. It was an opportunity, another chance to make up for previous mistakes. It gave him a purpose, a reason to keep moving forward, and a way to become something positive for his community instead of returning to the person he used to be. And unlike a lot of these other characters, Batman Beyond is probably the easiest character to understand because his entire history, his main history, is contained in one place. If you want to know Terry McGinnis, watch the 3-season series. That is where he debuted, and that is where his story was built. But what I really find interesting is how obvious the Spider-Man influence becomes when you look at his villains. They took classic Batman and Spider-Man ideas and reworked them and melded them into this darker, futuristic world. For example, Shriek is very inspired clearly by the Shocker, but instead of making him a very goofy, lovable villain, they turned him into a dangerous mercenary working for the main villain, Blight. His technology allows him to manipulate sound, but after a battle with Batman, he loses his hearing. So now, how do you deal with somebody from a writing perspective who has become disabled? How does revenge change when the person seeking it has lost something important? A character with a disability becomes a villain, and the story actually explores that. And then you have Spellbinder, who is basically a combination of Scarecrow and Mysterio. And that is what I always loved about Batman Beyond. They weren't afraid to combine Batman and Spider-Man concepts. Instead of using illusions to simply rob people, Spellbinder manipulates people into doing the crimes for him. They become trapped in their own hallucinations, basically hypnotized into giving him everything he wants. He even uses this against Batman himself, making Terry believe he's falling into a giant waterfall drop, only for him to realize he's actually putting himself in vertical danger, like he's actually falling down into the street below, buildings and stories above the ground. And Shriek himself had moments that were honestly insane for a kid's show. There was that famous episode where Bruce Wayne is injured and Shriek implants a device into his bandages. Bruce starts hearing voices, making it seem like he is losing his mind. The situation gets so bad that he literally walks towards a window and almost does exactly what you think. You would never see Shocker doing something like that. That right there is the difference. The level of depravity, intelligence, and how close these villains come to actually winning puts them on another level. Spellbinder also had a great concept with virtual reality. He creates a world where people can escape into their perfect lives, almost like a video game, but when they spend too much time outside of reality, they experience withdrawals. So now, you're dealing with metaphors about addiction, substance abuse, and the feeling of needing something that is destroying you on the inside. And then you have Ink, who is a combination of Sandman and Clayface, and while visually she might remind people of Venom, she couldn't be more different. Just like Shriek, she is a mercenary who uses her abilities and even people's obsessions with her to manipulate them. She takes advantage of someone who wants to become like her, who loves her, giving him an incomplete version of her serum that leaves him permanently damaged. He becomes a vegetable. That is crazy. But what makes her more interesting though is her personal story. She has a daughter, and despite eventually gaining wealth and becoming, having the ability to provide for her, she struggles with being a mother because of the circumstances that shaped her life. She wasn't given the best situation, and the choices she made came from trying to survive. She was in survival mode for all of her life. But eventually, even that relationship falls apart because it was never meant to survive to begin with. The daughter double crosses her, gets rid of her, and takes the money for herself. This is what makes Batman Beyond's villains work. They take the bare essentials of classic characters, mix them together, and then rebuild them around this new world, almost like a Firestorm style fusion, because Neo Gotham itself is a character. Even regular Gotham has always shaped the people living inside it. So, this creates an interesting question that gets answered almost every single time a revamp is made on screen. How do these villains change when they are placed into the cruel reality of Neo Gotham, and how does this new world reshape the Spider-Man and Batman influences that created them? The answers to these questions is what made Batman Beyond work so well to begin with. And finally, we obviously have to speak about Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle, and by the time of this recording, my GOAT got brought into Man of Tomorrow. The new Superman movie has Blue Beetle in it. Hello, welcome back. Now, the cool thing about these two characters, Spider-Man and Blue Beetle, is that their original versions were created, or at least co-created, by the legendary Steve Ditko. So these characters already share some DNA with each other, but Jaime Reyes is the third Blue Beetle, and easily the strongest and most iconic version of the character. Using his alien scarab, which very much feels like a combination of the Venom symbiote and Iron Man armor, he fights crime while trying to balance his normal life. Very Spider-Man coded, grounded, relatable, all the buzzwords you need. I've said that word multiple times throughout this video. Oh, it's so grounded and relatable. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing it, but that is the key word here. Jaime, though, is not just another adult Peter Parker variant. Again, he's a teenage Peter Parker variant. And what I love about Jaime, similar to Static, is that he uses the superhero genre to explore social issues. Unlike Peter, who mainly had Aunt May and had to hide his identity from almost everybody he loved, Jaime has his entire Mexican-American family by his side. There is no traditional secret identity story. The people closest to him know exactly who he is. And the first major Blue Beetle series really emphasizes the importance of family, community, and the experience of Mexican Americans trying to build a life together in modern-day America. So as you might expect, it explores systemic racism, xenophobia, and the constant tension between immigrant communities and the institutions around them, especially police and militaristic forces. And as you might expect, Blue Beetle as a whole tackles immigration and border politics, showing how families living along the US-Mexico border are often treated as political arguments instead of actual people with their own lives and struggles. But one of the biggest conflicts Jaime faces is resentment towards the people who are supposed to protect him. This level of disillusionment has probably hit almost every person of color at one point or another. The country that once represented hope and opportunity can sometimes become the very thing standing in his people's way. And one of the biggest examples of that is gentrification. Corporate greed is one hell of a thing, huh? Whether it is in El Paso, Texas, or even the fictional Palmyra City from newer stories, Jaime constantly finds himself fighting against corporations that care more about the profits than the people living there. Obviously, even Cord Industries, the company connected to his predecessor, can become something completely different when people with a different agenda take control. So instead of helping communities, these corporations are pushing working class people and minorities out of their home and neighborhoods to create more profitable areas for investors. And that's what makes Jaime such an important character. Just like Static gives readers insight into the Black experience, Jaime Reyes does the same thing for Hispanic and Mexican American communities. And I couldn't be happier that these two characters have become so influential, but more needs to be done. There needs to be more of a push, because imagine the impact of seeing more Black and Hispanic kids wearing Static or Blue Beetle t-shirts, looking up to characters who deal with struggles that they themselves experience. They deserve to be on the biggest screen and tiniest screen possible. They deserve television shows, movies, and more opportunities for younger audiences to see themselves represented, because sometimes people ignore real-world problems. The news can feel overwhelming, the issues can feel so constant and depressing that people naturally tune them out. Sometimes all it takes, though, is powerful media, movies and television to make people think, to make people understand experiences that are not too different from their own. And if superhero stories can be that bridge between people, then that's something worth supporting. So overall, when looking back at all these characters, it becomes clear that DC found something special. They didn't just copy Spider-Man, they took the core ideas that made Peter Parker work. The idea of a normal person trying to do extraordinary things, and they rebuilt that formula in completely different worlds. But DC is not done yet. Even recently, characters like Sideways show that DC continues experimenting with this formula. A character with teleportation abilities who looks just like Spider-Man, and even though he isn't currently a major player, people love his character. Him continuing to appear proves something. This is a winning formula, and it's something DC can return to whenever they want. So yeah guys, let me know down below, who is your favorite Spider-Man inspired character? Who do you think took the blueprints and made it something special? Did I miss anybody? Let me know. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live. Comment as well. And yeah, I'll see y'all later. Take care. Deuces. Peace.